Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where our purpose is to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve your organisation sustainably. Learn how to achieve and sustain an excellence journey for yourself, others, and the planet.
And I'm your host, Brad Jevons, coming to you from Brisbane, Australia. We are proudly brought to you in association with SA Partners, a world-leading business transformation consultancy. SA Partners are a truly purposeful company focused on helping organisations achieve sustainable improvement for themselves, others, and the planet. Welcome to episode 126 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. It is such a pleasure to have Mr Alex Selwood on the show with us today to discuss a topic many of us spend a lot of money on, but the results can be questionable. Alex is a mining engineer turned people capability creator. He is the co-founder of Expression for Growth, an organisation that for over 20 years has been pushing the boundaries on developing adult learning and capability. I've learnt so much from Alex that in turn, this has helped me generally deliver results for others, and I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this conversation where we can share some of the insights that I've gained and hopefully you can gain to create a better future. Alex, thanks so much for joining us today, mate.
Real pleasure. Looking forward to this very much.
Yeah, me too. Alex, what's your backstory? Like, what led you down this path to go from engineering into really studying and getting deep into how to build capability, largely in adults?
Yeah, I find it an interesting story anyway. I remember when I was at school, actually studying mining as part of my geography topic that I was studying at the time, and actually in Australia, and that kind of igniting my interest in the world of engineering. And my father has always been a great influence in my life, and he said, "Go off and be an engineer." So I went off and became a mining engineer, which I did for a bit. But if I'm honest, I probably wasn't a very good engineer, and I didn't really enjoy it. But I was inspired by the guy that sold me the explosives that I was using, and it sounds kind of weird, but it was a real seminal moment in my life that I realized I wanted to go and learn how to sell stuff. That was what I wanted to do. And so I went off and did that and worked for Mars, selling confectionery candy for a number of years and really enjoyed it, but also experienced a bunch of training, the recipients of a bunch of training. And there were a couple of things that really fascinated me about that. Was one, I found it really interesting. I found it really interesting, this kind of notion of training people. I thought that was interesting, but I also realized that most of the training that I received was pretty average. It didn't really ignite me. And my next job was in the training industry, which is great, but I was frustrated by the fact that so much training was seen as training. And what I mean by that is that training was seen as training rather than changing people's behavior or outlook. And if you talked about people spending a lot of money on this, Brad, right? You know, if you're an organization spending a lot of money on training, you don't want to spend money on training. You want to spend money on getting people to change their capability. And those two things are fundamentally different. And that led me to exploring more about, what is it that makes people change? What is it that makes people change? And that's, I guess, the holy grail in changing capability is really understanding what unlocks the blockages to getting people to change behavior. And at the time, my wife started reading quite extensively around the topic of personal change, and that ignited my interest as well. And we then both went off and studied NLP, so neuro-linguistic programming, understanding how you can unlock or unblock the barriers to change in yourself and others. And I remember coming back one day from one of those days of study, and she said to me, "We're going to set up our own business, aren't we?" And I remember that moment, and I remember kind of holding my hand in my head in my hand. Sorry, at the time, recently bought a bigger than I could afford house, 3 kids, and I'm just realizing that she was right, because she'd said the unsaid, and once it's out there, it was out there, and that was really the ignition point for us to kind of go, yeah, we're going to do this, and we're going to do something different, because we know that running a training course is not what people want. They want people to change their behavior, and those two things are so different. And that's when we set up Expression for Growth, and nearly in our 23rd year now, over 20 years later, it's something that fills me with a massive passion every day.
Well, I'm glad you did, Alex, because it definitely gave me some insights when I was connected with you and Nick and learnt about what you're doing. Because for me, I see so many organizations doing what you spoke about a minute ago or so, spending huge amounts of money on training. And I'd hate to think how much money in this world is spent on training. And if you look at the results that come from it, I guess people study the results that happen, don't they? What do they say? Like literally a week or two later, there's 70%'s gone, or if not more, and there's a lot of other data behind it. But why do companies just keep throwing money at training that doesn't cut through? What's your thoughts on that?
So what I want to say is that there are a lot of incredible organizations, and we're lucky to work with many of those, who actually don't do that. And the field of learning, and I think we'll talk a little bit about adult learning in a moment, because I think that's one of the keys to understanding this. The field of learning and development has evolved dramatically in the past 20 years, and there's some very, very smart people out there. And there are some amazing people within organizations, and those would be people that are in the L&D, so learning and development part of an organization, but also in the, we work with commercial teams, so very often people with great vision who lead the commercial function. So there are people who really get this. But it is also interesting that traditionally, training has been seen as a discretionary spend in organizations. We need to put our people on a training course, or they're not engaging our customers in the way we want to, so let's send them on a sales training course or a negotiation program or whatever it might be. And the challenge with that is that if that is how it's viewed, the reality is that, you're going to spend the money on the training, and training is not just what happens live. It's so much more around it. But if it's not followed through and it's not owned by that organization, it's likely that it will fizzle over a relatively short period of time. And so I guess to summarize, there are some really smart organizations out there who really get this. But if you look at enterprise generally, it's still a relatively small proportion of organizations who get that. And I guess one of our missions as an organization is to really engage with people to help them get that, so that no matter what their initial mindset is, we're enabled to sort of ignite that change through some of the mechanisms that we know work in this interesting world of adult learning.
Yeah. And that's been the big learning that I've gained from yourself. I think I've experienced a lot of that training, and probably delivered a fair bit of training myself that didn't really cut through, and have seen certain people get it and run away with it, and many that don't. But Alex, let's jump into this topic that I'm sure everyone wants to hear about, which is building capabilities in adults. And actually, what are the important things to consider to actually cut through and truly have amazing events that do build capability, but then I guess also the other bits that hang around it that really help it turn into skills and ability and deliver results.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating field, really fascinating. And I think one of the things we need to remember, and it's so obvious, but actually adults aren't kids, right? So when you're a child and you're learning, and your first experience of formal learning will be when you're at school or when you go to college, there is an obligation to learn, right? You're there, and okay, I know kids drop out and all the rest of it, but ultimately you're at school because you need to learn, and your teachers, for want of a better word, will teach you the stuff you need to learn to get your qualifications, to go off in life and forge your future. The biggest difference when you have a bunch of adults in the room is that they're not obliged to learn. Nobody is going to make them learn. And certainly because they have their own lives, their own experience behind them, they will have their own views on that, and nobody's going to tell them what to do. That's I think, probably one of the most important things for us to remember as, let's use the word loosely, educators in the world of training. So first of all, they're not obliged to learn. So therefore, they've got to want to learn. So, being put on a training course is probably the worst thing that you can do, because that's not necessarily going to ignite their passion for learning. That's the first thing. Second thing, they bring experience into the room. So, kids and university, even including university students, their depth of experience is going to be, by definition, relatively shallow. Why? Because, well, they're kids or young adults, so they have not lived the stuff that you are there in the classroom to teach them, so to speak. So the beauty of adult learning, and this is the beauty of it, and where that fundamental change starts to happen, is that they bring in, it might just be a year of experience, but it could be 20 years of experience in life, not just that job. And so they don't just bring opinion into the room, they bring experience. And what they can do with that experience is enrich what happens in the room. Now, they've got a lot more in their day-to-day lives that also bring in experience into the room. So, for example, you might be talking about selling, but actually what's behind selling is very rich and very deep, because it involves human interaction, it holds connection, it involves rapport, it involves empathy, it involves listening and asking questions and all that kind of stuff. And people do that in their day-to-day lives. They got kids, they got friends, they got family, they understand that through many different dimensions. So their depth is far deep, it's a far deeper depth that we're able to mine, to go back to my first career, in order to bring that experience into the room. And that's really, really impressive. And I think the final thing to think about building capability in adults is that they will engage it. They're more likely to engage with the learning if there is a reason to learn. So in other words, there's a purpose behind them being out of their normal work, out of their day-to-day, and into some kind of environment where they're going to pick up new stuff. They need a reason for it, and it needs to be overt, and it needs to be understood and acknowledged. And those four things really help you shape the way that you create, the way that we create adult learning and training in that context.
It's amazing as you were talking through that, Alex. I was just thinking about, we go through school, we go through university, and it teaches I guess in a way through habit, we're learning, okay, that's the way you teach people. And when naturally, I think on reflection, even myself, you can roll straight into adult learning and just go the same path as what you do through uni or through high school. But it really hit home for me, that piece about adults don't have to learn, and then they've got masses of experience and they've got to have that reason to want to learn. But if we go back to motivation, what do you find? How do you build that motivation on? How do you tap into it? What's the key there with motivation, Alex, on that piece?
So that's a really good question. For me, as a facilitator of learning, when you are with adults, and we're assuming here we're thinking about the live element of the training, right? So, and we maybe talk about this a little bit later, but training is not just what happens live, it's what happens around it, all of the resources around it. But in that moment when you are live in front of a group, the thing that I find most helpful is to have a mindset that actually collectively in that room, whether it's a physical room or a virtual room, whatever the format is, but collectively in that room, all the knowledge we need exists already. So I'm not here to be, I'm going to use one of your phrases here, Brad. I'm not here to be a sage on the stage, right? I could be, but that would be the instant track to turning off the group. So my mindset as a facilitator and the way that we work as an organization is to assume that the knowledge exists. And to be honest, even if only 90% of the knowledge exists, that means that you're only adding in that 10% that's needed. And that's a really powerful mindset. Why? Because collectively, that knowledge is in the room. Great. Okay. So therefore, if you're able to access that knowledge, in effect, you co-create the content with the group. And whilst you know where you're going as a facilitator, you've got the model and you want them to go off and experience it, rather than teaching the model emerges from that group. And the challenge with that, and I'm sure we'll touch on this later, that's really tough to do. That's difficult to do. It's a skill set which I know you and I spent a lot of time playing with in the previous few months, actually, Brad. And it's incredible when you are able to develop the skills to be able to mine that knowledge and bring it into the room. So that is and you talked about motivation. That's so motivational for a group of people because they are masters of their destiny. You're just a facilitator of it.
Yeah, that's powerful. I can understand with that response you've given and that knowledge there, Alex, of really, the knowledge is in the room. Our job's to facilitate and bring that knowledge out and to co-create. That's such a great word for it, isn't it? Co-create the outcome. You're ticking the box of motivation. I was thinking of that statement. Tell me and I forget. Show me and I might understand. Might get it. Involve me and I'll understand. Like that was going through my mind. But then also, it also ticks the box of that, drawing out their experience and their depth of knowledge. What does that look like, Alex? Like, do you mind explaining a bit of what does it look like where you're co-creating to really engage that motivation, but also draw out that experience that's in the room already?
So, well, there's no straightforward answer to this one, Brad, but because and one of my insights has been recently that the job of doing that is actually really, really difficult. And maybe we'll come back to that later.
I experienced it trying to get trained, getting coached to be able to do that. I can let everyone know it's not easy.
Brad, you've been around the block a bit, right? You've read a few programs over your career, correct?
Yes, many.
And wasn't it interesting as we went through your journey to come in and do some work with us, how big that shift was for you?
Yep. I haven't experienced any of it since probably university in one of the toughest subjects I've been in. Not that depth of awkwardness, pressure. I don't know this. Boy, I've got to learn a lot here. Yeah, it's the hardest I've ever been through since probably school.
Well, and thank you for that observation, Brad. And sorry, it was hard, but hopefully it was vaguely interesting at the same time. And I'm at the stage in my career now where ultimately, my role in our business will there's an end to that. I hate to say it that way, but there's an end to that. And one of my projects specifically this year, is to create how to do it. And that sounds very, very simple. And, we're well into that project now, having started to unpeel all of the elements that are required to be able to do what you've just asked. One, you recognize that it's a thesis, it's in its own right, but then how to bring that into a format where other people who have experience of doing it, but maybe not the insight or the origins of it, which I guess I've created over 20 years in our way of approaching. That's a really challenging project, and that's what we're right in the middle of now. The simple answer, so this is the simple answer, okay? The simple answer to the question you've asked is for you as a facilitator to think of someone who needs to pull rather than push. So, okay, this notion of mining the resources in the room and so on, what does that require? That requires you to be genuinely curious. So, let's put a little bit of a caveat around that. If you're an experienced facilitator and you're running a sales program, okay, so our sales program, you will recall, Brad, is called precision selling. Okay, so you run precision selling and you run it 30 times before. So the questions you ask of that group to mine that knowledge, you can almost definitely predict there or thereabouts the answers you're going to get. But if you have that mindset that here we go again, you will not engage that group. So the first thing is this genuine curiosity you need to bring into the room. So you're going to ask similar questions to a group of people that you might have asked last week, and you're going to get similar but some different answers. But your job is to be curious. What do you need to be curious? You need to be able to ask great questions. Of course you do, live and in the moment, to have the confidence that whatever comes back is going to be useful. Remember, the resources are in the room. But then show genuine curiosity. So empathic listening, intentional listening, super important, so that you genuinely value what comes back from the group. And then if you then follow your track to your outcome, which is for that group to co-create with you the content that you're then going to get them to experience and go away and practice, you then ignite the curiosity and the motivation with the group. So if you will, there's your outcome is your key focus, and always building from the outcome backwards is central to your success, by the way, in life, let alone running a program or a set of programs or an initiative with an organization. But genuine, in the moment curiosity and intentional listening with that group, that's got to be your biggest friend.
Yeah, I love how you've landed on that word, curiosity. Like everyone, I've been coached by Alex and by another team member, Nick, and I heard about curiosity a lot. And it reminds me too of the other piece that you've all said to me, is that you need to treat each event as if it's your first event, because it is their first event. And naturally that thought of, being in that place that, okay, here we go. This is like the first event. Let's go in there. This is their first event. It brings that curiosity, doesn't it? And it brings that level of energy to each one you do.
It does, most certainly. And somebody, I heard it as a phrase I borrowed or stole with pride from somebody one day. He said, first time every time. And I thought, yeah, first time every time. What a great mindset to have, because if you genuinely go into it, realizing it, that actually for probably everybody in the room, this is the very first time for them that they've experienced this brand of whatever it is that you're doing. If you do it as if it's your 21st time, you're not going to engage, you're not going to be curious, you're going to be blasé about it, and that's when you fail. And you're only as good as your last intervention, so to speak. So first time every time, absolutely. And bring the energy that requires into the room, virtually or physically, every time without fail.
Yeah, it's great. Go to enterpriseexcellencepodcast.com/downloads to get hold of an agile, large-scale planning template you can use to plan your next event. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast to help others gain insights and create a better future. Let's get back to the episode. You're going to have that, you come into the place as if it's the first time every time. You're going to show deep curiosity. Naturally, it's going to have you asking great questions to really draw out that experience and co-create, which is going to drive motivation in the individuals. Now, when Alex mentioned there's a lot of depth to this, I can vouch for that. We're talking about things, Alex, aren't we, like body language, tone, word selection, body posture, you name it, we're talking about plays a part in this. But why do all these elements of you as a facilitator play such a big part on the outcome you get of one of those individuals in the room having a great event and either learning or not?
So if you think about everything you've just talked about, it's all communication. And there'll be many people on this podcast going, yeah, right, here we go. We know that body language is the biggest element of communication. Tonality is really important and words are less significant. And, and that research goes back 50 years. We all instinctively know that when we read somebody, when we're observing someone, that we will absolutely pick up probably much more than what they're saying by the way that they're saying it. And the way that they're saying it could be the tonality in their body language. Well, if that's the reality, get serious about it. Let's just boil it right down. Let's not over complicate it. Let's not go and write another thesis and do any more research on it. If we know that we are really influenced by the way people say stuff, and we are, and what they're doing whilst they're saying it, leverage that. So that means become aware of how you're coming across. And the most incredible concepts in the world can be as dull as you like if you don't put energy into how it's come across or the story you tell behind it. to ignite the interest and make it relevant to the people that are listening to you. And for me, okay, the science behind it is complex, but it's simple. Get the fact that the way you engage a group of people when you're live, in particular, is fundamental to the likelihood that they're going to get excited about what you got to say.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the what, it's the technique, but actually the how is critical. And that's why we spend so much time focusing on your posture, your stance, your tone, let alone the cleanness of your language, the unambiguous nature of language that you use to communicate.
And for an Aussie, that's not easy, Alex, but we're making progress. We're making progress.
You'll catch up one day.
Alex, I think too, for listeners, Alex mentioned that it's not easy. And this is where it's not easy, because there's so many aspects of habit change within yourself that you can work on to amplify that experience and outcome, isn't it, Alex? It's infinite. It's ongoing. It's forever.
Yeah, for sure. And, as you get into learning that, so the process you've been on with us, Brad, but also, the process that I am now codifying through this project, as you become more and more self-aware, what you're able to do is what's referred to as self-editing. You're able to almost take a third position. So almost watch yourself in the room, watch yourself on your webinar or whatever it might be, and observe in the moment what's going on. And it's slightly distracting at times, but what you're able to do is like, okay, what language did I just use then? How clean was that? Or, what is my autocorrect for next time I do that? And, what am I doing with my hands at the moment? And okay, what's my posture like at the moment? And you've got almost like this inner voice that develops as you become more and more aware. Your acuity improves around those things. And that's liberating, because, and when I work with people, and Brad, it's the same case with you, when I'm asking you to give yourself feedback, pretty much you're doing 80% of what I've noticed as an outside observer, because your awareness becomes higher. So the good news about this is once you get and put your arms around some of these techniques, and you stay conscious within that, and that's really key, this first time, every time mindset, is you're able to continually improve, and that's exciting.
Yeah, I can vouch for that, Alex, but I can also vouch that capability, and I'm only just touching the tip of the iceberg on that capability, but to be able to touch the tip of the iceberg on that capability, it took months of work. So I can vouch for how powerful it is, just that I'm starting to experience it to a slight degree. But I can also say there's a lot of practice and a lot of work to get to that. Alex, there's a topic you mentioned there also with adult learning, to be able to help really build that capability and that great outcomes through an event, which is the reason to be there. What do you mean by the reason to be there for one of the attendees?
So first of all, I want to just challenge the word event.
Yep.
And the reason why I want to challenge that is that so many organizations think about the training as the event. The training is not the event. The training is there to change behavior, right? And it will not happen with an event. Now, the event needs to be amazing. Okay, so the live intervention, for want of a better word, needs to be all the things we just talked about. It needs to be, I use the word slightly tongue-in-cheek, but almost life-changing in the context of that particular skill set. Things that are going to provoke real change. If you think about the reason why people change, they will change their behavior if something they believe about that topic is shifted in some way. And that's why we use the techniques that we've talked about before in terms of engaging people, getting them to bring their own experience into the room and so on. Otherwise, it's a behavior change. It's a little bit like getting a new diary at the beginning of the year, in the days when we used to have diaries that, kind of lasted 2 weeks before, in fact, you realize you were as disorganized as you were before you had the new diary. You've got to do something to make a fundamental change. The other piece behind this is, if people are going to change in the room, there needs to be this, I mentioned this earlier, there's need to change. And I would say at an enterprise level, that's also going to be really, really clear. So if that organization or that part of that organization with whom you're working, there needs to be absolutely crystal clarity around the need to change and what that need is. And if you start with that, you've got a fighting chance of then creating the solution not the event, the solution that will address that need. And that solution will be multifaceted. It will be something that you are, as an organization, able to solve yourself to an extent. You'll have internal resource, and whether that's content or people, I'm certainly experienced that can start to address that. But then you will find things that need stimulus from the outside, which is, where organizations like us come in. You're able to then source solutions. And again, the word solution is really important here. It's not about the event. It's about the things that go around the event. So, for example, the engagement of the leadership of that organization, the buy-in from the key stakeholders, so that it's not just a flash in the pan, it's something that is enduring. It's what happens before the event. So it's the multiple elements of, let's go anything from e-learning through to webinars to whatever it might be, then engage that group so they're ready to learn. And then so that when the event happens, the live piece happens, they are pre-informed. They have engaged ahead of time with the reality of what we're trying to do. And then that event becomes even more, has even more impact for them. And then what happens after the event? And I'm not just talking about the resources, the e-learning resources, the videos, the how-to videos, the content that the line managers, are working with on them to help them embed that. It's about, what does that mean in terms of the impact of the change of behavior? How's that measured? What's the ROI? What's the return on investment, which was determined at the beginning of that process? And how are we measuring that? How are we keeping them engaged? So the solution then becomes multifaceted, which is obviously tailored to that organization based on their needs, their budgets, their existing resources, and so on. And that's what motivates the person in the classroom to really engage, not just with the event, but over the whole long-term solution.
That's brilliant. So it's more than just an event. It's this whole lead-in piece that comes into it, the engaging the leaders, getting the leadership backing, pre-learning that can help them to start to engage and think, but then also post, measured and tracked. Alex, there's another part of what you do, I know, which is precision coaching, where you actually look to develop capability at coaching, which is, I guess, I see as a post-event piece that I've seen you do so far. But why do you also focus in on building capability on leadership coaching as part of this work or this solution?
So it's a great question, Brad. So our job, first of all, is not to create qualified coaches in the business. That's not what we do. That's not our outcome. Our outcome is to have people in the business sufficiently confident, and that's really important, and then capable to be able to engage their teams around whatever it is that the capability shift that we've been working on. So again, let's just keep it simple. Let's talk about selling. There will be, I don't know, let's say there will be half a dozen, maybe a dozen things that are really, really important that organization engages with, and the individuals are held accountable for, whether it be the way that they prepare for their customer meetings, for example, or whether it's the skills that they use during those customer meetings, or whether it's the quality of the materials that are created and shared with their customers, or whatever it might be. So there'll be many, many different things which will be familiar to most people in the organization, but there may be an orientation specifically around the language that is taught in precision selling, for example. So if you're going to get that to stick, the leadership in that organization, and I'm not necessarily talking about the C-suite leadership. What I'm talking about is even the line manager leadership. So the next level up, and way beyond that, but even that first level, that those people feel informed, capable, and confident to be able to coach. And what coaching means, in the sense that we're talking here, is they're able to engage their people through great questioning, curiosity, observation. Okay, many of the things that we just talked about from a facilitation perspective, but one-on-one, live. So those people are capable and confident to do so, but are also held accountable for their people's performance, because the well-worn 70-20-10 mindset around learning, which I'm sure you've heard of, Brad, says that actually 10% of it comes from the ignition in the classroom, the live event, but actually 70% of learning comes from the workplace. And that means that the 20% that's left has to become from the people that are keeping those plates spinning. And this means that, line managers and leadership in the organization need to be motivational coaches. So they need to be people who are able to engage people through great questions, great listening, and great observation, so that people are continually exposed to what it is they're learning, but also the expectation. And one of the things I remember about my first job outside my mining career, when I was a sales guy at Mars, when I started off as a rep at Mars, selling candy, one of the people that I remember that, I guess, with hindsight, inspired me most was my first boss, because when I used to work with him, it was great day out. But he would work with me, he'd sit with me, he'd ride with me, and we'd sit with me in customer meetings, and then he'd debrief me afterwards. And there was always a degree of anxiety that I had going into those days, because I knew that the expectations were high. And if we can get, that's not new, by the way. It's just that it doesn't happen so often. And if we can ignite that in organizations as well, we then have a fighting chance of, those skills living every day, not just in the context of the moment of the event, going back to your word.
Yeah, I love that. So we've got that engagement up front with leadership to, engage, understand that true need and that path forward, pre-learning, capability building event that's amazing with heaps of curiosity, measures to track going forward, and then ongoing curiosity and great coaching with a touch of anxiety, because we know that it's about getting better. It's about creating better outcomes, better capability. And that takes stretch, doesn't it? That just doesn't happen without effort. Exactly.
It's like any skill. I mean, the obvious examples are, athletes. Talk to any top athlete, and I suspect there'll be lots of similarities with about what we've just spoken about in terms of how to continue to keep that edge. There's not many people at the top of the game. The top is, is small, right? There's not many people there.
Yeah, the 5% club.
But well, you talk about the 5% club. In of the tens and tens of thousands of people that we've trained in the past 22 and a bit years, we ask those people habitually at the beginning of any program to think about, and we do it experientially with them, to get them to really think about, the proportion of salespeople that they come across who they would, rate positively against the behaviors of great salespeople. And the pretty consistent feedback is, it comes between like 1 and 20, but, on average is about 5%. So we talk about the 5% club because there's so few people in it, but actually when you boil it down, it's about consistency of behavior, and behaviors which aren't really difficult. They just need to be consistent.
Yeah, but that's the opportunity, isn't it, too? Like when you think that out of all these events you've run and people you've helped, and they're all coming in around 5% of people at the top of their game that they experience in their life, that means there's 95% of people that we can help bring up into that element. But it requires these things you're talking about, is what you're saying. It requires this leadership engagement, this really great learning experience that builds capability, but then ongoing curiosity with a touch of anxiety in there from leadership to keep building that capability and keep growing. Yeah. And I got to admit, Alex, you look at even myself, mate, when we spoke, I've said to you that it was back in university that I felt the level of stretch that I've been through to have to build myself up to another level. That's a long time. I'm quite grey now. You're probably talking 23 years in between.
At least you're grey. At least you're grey. At least you're grey. Look at this. But what and there's something else. There's a reflection there, and this is meant with the greatest of respect. Yeah, if you take an adult population of 100 people in sales, let's just make it simple. What proportion of those people are hungry to learn? And I think the answer is actually it's not many, and I do mean that with great respect. Just from our experience, there's a whole lot of people there, kind of like they're in life and they're in their track, right? They're in their day to day, and like so many of us, we don't always think of, we're not entering consciously into what do I need to do today to have my best day? We don't have that mindset. I mean, it would be exhausting, wouldn't it, if we all did all of the time. But you take that population of 100 people, that maybe, I don't know what the number is, maybe let's say 15 of them are really hungry to learn. There'll be another bunch in the middle that didn't realize they were hungry to learn, but you can ignite it. And there'll always be, I don't know, 10% of people who really, frankly, will just carry on doing what they were doing. And that's fine, and that's just our reality. But our job as professionals in this industry is to ignite that will to change, and that's the key. You got to ignite the will to change, and then you got to put everything around it to sustain that change, which is where the organizational piece comes in.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Alex, what would be your 2-minute tip to a leader or, a sales enablement manager or a business improvement leader, continuous improvement leader in an organization that wants to help people build more capability and truly reach up into more of that 5% level of top performance?
So 2 minutes. So I have thought about this, and I've got 5 tips, within those 2 minutes, and here they go. Some of them we've touched on already. First of all, there must be a clear need identified, and a clear need that can be identified and measured. So think about what you're trying to achieve as an organization, how it will be measured. So what's the ROI going to be? How are you going to go about that? So what's the need? How can it be identified and how it can be measured? That's the real key. So the other thing I was going to say is, and how are you going to hold people accountable for that? And that sounds brutish, but ultimately, if you're investing, a significant sum of money into that, people need to step up to that. Which brings me to the second point, is that your key stakeholders need to get that need and get behind that need. Which leads to the third piece, which is that your leadership must lead by example. So it's all very well having key stakeholders who get the need. They then need to change their behavior. So a leader's first approach to this capability development is really important from a success criteria perspective. It can't be the language for them. It has to be the language for us. So leaders need to get behind it all the way and lead by example. And where we've seen seismic shift, and I say that really without exaggeration, in capability in the organizations, is when that's happened. And that's where some of the multiple awards, a little bit of a drop there, for the work that we've done with some of our clients have happened. It's where we've seen that kind of change. Number 4, the learning must be multifaceted, and the stimulus must be sustained, but also sustainable. And what I mean by that is that, so you gave me this one on a plate, Brad, it's not an event, It's a solution. And that solution has multiple elements to it, from self-serve e-learning right through to classroom live, and many, many, many things in between. That must be that. And the 5th thing, and I really want to leave this 2-minute tip with this live right between the eyes, is that the learners, who are adults, must be engaged. You can't do it to them. They've got to be architects of their own learning. And to do that, we use all the techniques that we talked about earlier, but they must be engaged. So 5 tips from me, which I think are critical.
Yeah, that's great, Alex. And I think everyone will be really looking forward to the work that you're doing over this coming time to really create learning and a solution for facilitators and leaders to be able to get better at what we're talking about, because it's certainly, there's some real power in this, massive power in this. Alex, what's been a recent insight for you? What's been something that sort of sat you back a bit, a new learning?
So I had to think about this one as well, quite hard, and we've touched on it a little bit. It's come from the project I'm working on right now to, if you like, put what I do in a bottle and make it, accessible to, the future people in our business. And that's that. And I say this, that many people listening to this will get this. I think there will be people who will intellectually get this, but not viscerally get it. And Brad, I would suggest that you might have been one of those people before we started working together. And then there will be people who will deny this. And in other words, they won't see it. So I recognize that this won't fall easily on every ear, but there will be people there who will absolutely get this. And that is, and I'm going to call this a facilitator, all right? So a facilitator of learning. So when you are working with a group live, that's what I mean by that. That the job we do as a facilitator is really, really hard. I also know, because I've worked with so many thousand people over the years and so many organizations and seen so many other training organizations operate. There are many great businesses out there with incredible content and ideas. But I know the way that we do it is rare in the industry. And I'm convinced by that. That's not my marketing spiel. That's not my, please listen to me and give us a call spiel. This is we know that what we do is different. And Brad, the feedback you gave us earlier on and the times we spent together in the past endorses that again. There's not many businesses out there, that training businesses, let's call them, that go beyond the basic model of discuss, practice, debrief. That's too easy. That's what most organizations do. And to engage a group of adults live in the moment and then combine those insights with amazing content so that, you ignite that change. It is rare and difficult, but it's liberating when you do it. And that's my insight. And it's been really helpful to have that insight.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you're bottling that right now, because it is a superpower. Like, it's definitely a superpower, and it's great that you're bottling that, and for prosperity and others to learn from, which I've been fortunate to. I think, Alex, too, to just vouch for what you're saying, one of the first things I got to do was actually just watch one of the team doing a virtual event. And I think you and I spoke shortly after, or Nick and I, and it's like, okay, there's something different here. I've not seen this before. What's going on here? And it's really brilliant, because I think I mentioned to you and a lot of our listeners know my drive is to help people create a better future. To do that, we've got to get more sustainable outcomes where, transformations and work to actually get better, actually stick and keep going, because most fail. And this is a massive part of it, if not the part of it.
Here. And, I guess I've made it my life's work, certainly in the past 23-ish, more than that, in the industry, 28 years, or 29 years now of my life. I've made it my life, and it has, so what enabled me to skip out of bed in the morning, most definitely, was knowing that I was able to make this kind of change. But, certainly in recent years, and certainly in the past sort of 10 years or so, starting to formalize that more and get some more shape around it rather than it just being what I did. And when you start to look at that, you realize, one, the impact you can make when you get it right, but also, frankly, how difficult that is. You don't always get it right, but when you get it right, my goodness, do you make a change? It's so inspiring to see how people change.
And it's, I think as soon as I started to learn and get involved with you and Nick and a lot of the other team, I was like, right, I've got to get you on the podcast, because there's some insights for people to gain here. So I really appreciate it, Nick, Alex, and all the team that were involved with me, Nick and the others as well. Alex, how can people reach out to you or the team at Expressions for Growth if they want to learn more and build capability? Particularly, the main focus at the minute is in sales capability, isn't it? But with what you're developing now, it's going to go so much further.
Yeah. So Expression for Growth, only one of them, Brad, just to pull your leg on that one. And so the simplest way is website, expressionforgrowth.com, all one word, expressionforgrowth.com. And that's the easiest way to access the business without complicating it at all, or myself directly on LinkedIn, Alex Selwood on LinkedIn, pretty easy to find. So those are the two obvious ways to build a little bit on what you just said there. Yes, commercial capability is what we do. We look at it through the lens of how do you think strategically in a really innovative way about your business with your customers, so precision thinking. How do you sell to them? Precision selling. If you need to negotiate, how do you negotiate with them? Precision negotiating. And then how do you tell your stories? How do you build amazing stories? Precision storytelling. If you think about that kit bag, that's what people working in a commercial organization need to be able to do really well, and that's what we have become famous for. We work with leadership teams. We have solutions where we help leaders become leaders, and then leaders become amazing leaders with all of their experience as well. And we work very often with teams to help them develop and become functional. So yeah, we do a whole bunch of stuff, and the website will guide you through it, and also you're able to be able to reach us very easily there. So yeah, that's the easiest way.
Great. Well, thanks for the time, Alex, and thanks for your knowledge and everything you have done and will continue to do in the future. It's really exciting with this new phase of development and creation that you're doing. And thanks for helping us create a better future, mate. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. It's great to be here. And I look forward to our next phase together, Brad.
Cheers, Alex. Ditto.
What a great episode. Remember, you can visit our website, enterpriseexcellencepodcast.com/downloads to get hold of an agile event large-scale plan template you can use to plan your next event. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast to help others gain insights and create a better future. There were 2 key takeaways for me from this episode. Firstly, curiosity. Alex mentioned the approach of drawing out the knowledge of the event attendees and getting them to engage in the event and think more deeply. This requires curiosity from all involved. Curiosity avoids arrogance and preaching. It prompts the use of open questions, active listening, really focusing on the person to understand them and their thoughts more deeply. This is a very respectful and humble approach, which ultimately results in building trust, drawing knowledge out of the people, and ultimately the engagement and contribution to greater learning. The second key takeaway for me was the solution aspect Alex was talking about. Capability in team building is multifaceted. Alex spoke about pre-leadership engagement as being critical, as it's ultimately the leadership coaching and support ongoing which will truly help all the people bridge the knowing-doing gap, take that learning that they've developed and the capability through the events and turn it truly into behaviour and activity that's going to help them and the organisation achieve greater results. It is important with leadership to clearly understand the learning and organisational needs as part of this solution, as well as the ongoing measures that we're going to track and monitor. What gets measured ultimately gets done. The capability building event is taken to a new level with curiosity and a highly engaging approach. Post-event, ongoing coaching with ongoing curiosity and measurement tracking is then critical. This solution approach really helps attendees take a journey of capability building, helping them move forward towards their potential. It also helps an enterprise optimize its investment, the money they put into this type of approach to build capability. It truly helps everyone build capability and create a better future. Thanks again for your time and knowledge, Alex. Thanks for helping us create a better future. Bye for now.